Welcome to Deadscape Diaries, where the forgotten, the unknown, and the terrifying come to life. Tonight, we take you on a journey into a city lost to time, a place that should have stayed buried. Deep in the mountains, there lies a city, abandoned, or so we thought. What we uncovered was something much darker, a city not left behind, but frozen in time. Watch closely, for once you find the forgotten city, you can never leave. Join me, as we unravel the chilling truth in tonight's story, The Forgotten City. The mountains had always called to me, but I never expected them to answer back the way they did. My name is Peter Walker, and I've spent the better part of my life chasing after lost history, long-forgotten places that most people only dream about. And that's exactly why I found myself, along with a group of fellow adventurers, trekking deeper into the wilderness than I had ever gone before. The city was nothing more than a whispered legend, a place so remote that no one even bothered to map it. For centuries, it had been erased from history. Lost to time, some said. I had heard the stories for years, rumors passed down by old explorers, half mad and speaking of a city that had vanished without a trace. There were no photographs, no records, just cryptic references in ancient texts. But the more I dug into it, the more it seemed like the kind of place I needed to find. A city lost to the ages, trapped in a moment of history, preserved in ways that no other place could be. My team consisted of 4 people, myself, of course, and then Marcus, the quiet and steady geologist, Eleanor, a historian whose knowledge of ancient cultures could rival any university professor, and Jonah, the mechanic and technology expert, whose gadgets could probably map a planet if he put his mind to it. We were as prepared as anyone could be for an expedition like this. If anything, it was our ambition that outweighed our knowledge of what we were truly getting ourselves into. We had set off from the small town of Brackenstone, the nearest settlement to the mountain range, just 3 days ago. The journey was rough from the start, with narrow trails carved out of sheer rock faces and unpredictable weather that threatened to turn us back at every turn. But we pushed on, eager for what lay ahead. Eleanor had found something that had set her mind ablaze with the possibility of finally uncovering the truth behind the city's disappearance. A single, cryptic map fragment that hinted at the city's last known location. By the time we reached the outskirts of the forgotten city, we were all on edge, tired, but with the thrill of discovery pushing us forward. The day had begun to fade, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting the landscape in a surreal golden light. We had no idea what we were about to find, but we all knew we were on the cusp of something monumental. At first, the city seemed exactly like what I expected, a ruin, a relic of the past. It was vast, though, more expansive than I imagined. We entered a wide, crumbled archway at the edge of the city, and it felt like stepping into a different era. The city was made of stone, its buildings imposing and tall, despite their age. Ancient carvings adorned the walls, and massive stairways led up to higher levels where the mountains seemed to swallow the city whole. "I can't believe this is real," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe as he examined the stonework around the entrance. This place must have been thriving before it disappeared. "Look at these carvings. They're like nothing I've ever seen." Eleanor was already poring over her notes, comparing what we were seeing to the ancient texts she had studied. "This is incredible," she muttered to herself. "If these inscriptions are correct, this city existed centuries before any of the other known civilizations in this region." Jonah, who had been scanning the area with his handheld device, frowned. Something's off. I'm getting a strange reading. It's not picking up any life signs. No animals, no insects, nothing. We all paused at that. It was strange. Even in the most desolate places, you could usually find signs of life, small animals or birds that had adapted to the environment. But here? Nothing. Jonah tapped his device again. The readings are all wrong. It's like the city is suspended. No life signs, and the atmospheric pressure is strangely consistent. Like this place hasn't changed in years. I shook my head. Maybe it's just the altitude. This place is a remote ruin, after all. But there was a gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something about this city wasn't just old, it felt wrong. But we continued onward, pressing deeper into its heart. We wandered through narrow streets lined with tall, empty buildings, their windows shattered or boarded up. But the strange thing was that everything seemed too perfect. The structures weren't collapsing like ruins usually did. No plants had overtaken the walls. The streets were empty, but they didn't have the chaotic mess of decay. The city looked almost pristine. Frozen in time, as if nothing had moved or changed in centuries. "Where is everyone?" Eleanor murmured. "There's not a soul in sight." That was the first time we noticed the oddity that would haunt us for the rest of our time in the city. The people. At first, I thought I had just missed seeing them. Maybe they had all gone indoors or were hiding in the shadows. But as we ventured further into the city, it became clear that there was no one. Not a single living person. Yet there were figures in the streets. Figures that didn't move. They were frozen, like statues, caught in mid-action, as if they had been placed there for some strange purpose. A woman was standing near an old well, her hand outstretched, as if reaching for something, or someone. A child was frozen mid-run, his face full of joy, but his legs were caught in an unnatural, suspended motion. A man stood in the market square, his hand raised as if he were waving to someone, but his body was completely still. My stomach twisted. This wasn't right. These figures weren't sculptures, they were people. Real people. Frozen in place. Trapped. We stopped, and Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "This isn't possible," she said, her voice shaking. "These are not statues. These are real people. They're trapped." We walked carefully toward the frozen figures, our steps muffled by the dust that covered the ground. It was eerily quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I reached out a hand to touch one of the figures, a woman with flowing robes, frozen in mid-sentence, her mouth open as though she had been speaking before the world had stopped moving. My fingers brushed her shoulder, and a sudden, violent chill shot through my arm. I pulled back, instinctively. The woman's features didn't feel cold like stone, they felt too real, as though they had been suspended in time, caught in an unnatural pause. I looked around at the others, all of us silently grappling with the same question. How? How is this happening? Jonah whispered, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice low. "But whatever happened here, it's not just a city that's been abandoned. It's frozen. We stood in a small square surrounded by these frozen figures, each one locked in some form of motion that made them appear alive, until you looked closer. Their eyes were wide, their expressions frozen in time, but there was no life in them. No breath. No heartbeat. And then I saw it, on one of the walls, written in faded symbols, something that had been left behind. It was a warning. Once found, never to leave. Once touched, never to return. The words sent a shiver down my spine. There was something terribly wrong with this place. Something beyond our understanding. As we began to back away from the figures, the whispers started. Soft at first, like a distant wind brushing through the city. But then they grew louder. Faint voices, too quiet to make out. And with each step we took, the whispers grew more insistent, more demanding. As though they were calling us to stay. But we couldn't stay, not yet. We turned to leave, the unease settling over us like a heavy blanket, but as we retraced our steps toward the city's entrance, the whispers followed us, growing louder. We tried to ignore them, but the feeling of being watched, of being trapped, grew stronger. Something was wrong, and I knew, deep down, that we weren't alone. We were never meant to find this city. And now that we had, I realized with sickening clarity, we might never leave. We spent the night in the remnants of a crumbling building, huddled together under the oppressive silence of the forgotten city. The temperature had dropped, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was the feeling that something was watching us, something waiting. The whispers had not stopped, not even once. Faint, elusive, like the wind brushing against the walls, but when you stopped to listen closely, they seemed to come from all around us. The walls. The street. The air itself. We tried to rest. But how do you sleep in a place like this? A city frozen in time, filled with people caught in mid-motion, their frozen eyes staring at us as we passed. It was as if they knew we were trespassing, as if they were aware of our every movement, every breath. The weight of their gaze lingered in the back of my mind, heavy and oppressive, even as I lay down in the dark. Eleanor was the first to break the silence that night. "I don't think we should go any deeper," she said, her voice sharp and uncharacteristically tense. "There's something wrong here." "Something is," she stopped, as though she couldn't quite find the words. "Something is keeping this place intact. And I don't think it's just the city that's trapped. I think we are, too." Jonah, who had been tinkering with one of his gadgets in the corner, didn't look up. "It's an old city, Ellie. I get that, okay? But this is more than just time being frozen. I'm telling you, this isn't natural. The readings I'm getting, they're inconsistent. The atmosphere isn't right. I've never seen anything like it." Marcus had been staring out at the broken windows for some time. Maybe this place was cursed. Or maybe something happened to it, something we're not meant to understand. He shuddered, his eyes flicking nervously toward the city outside. What if this city didn't just disappear? What if it stopped? The suggestion hung in the air for a long time. We all felt it, the creeping sense that the city wasn't just abandoned. That it wasn't merely a place where time had slipped away. It was as if time itself had decided to forget this place entirely. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about the figures in the street, their frozen poses, their glassy eyes, the more it felt like something had happened to this city. Something so horrifying that it had bent the very fabric of time and space. And we were caught in its wake. When dawn finally broke, we were all on edge. The city had a new quality to it in the light of day, though it didn't make it any less terrifying. The sun barely reached the streets, the shadow of the mountains looming over everything. We gathered our gear quickly, determined to leave the building and press forward into the heart of the city. Despite everything, the pull of discovery was too great. The curiosity, the need to understand, was stronger than the dread gnawing at our nerves. We made our way toward the center of the city, where the largest building loomed, the one that had once likely been the hub of civilization here. A grand structure, larger than anything we had seen so far. Its jagged, broken steps led up to a massive stone doorway, the archway so high that it seemed to pierce the sky itself. There was a strange energy about the place, a hum in the air. It felt like something ancient was watching us, not from the streets, not from the statues, but from within the city itself. Marcus was the first to approach the doorway, his footsteps echoing loudly against the stone. He paused just before entering, looking back at the rest of us. His face was drawn, pale, his eyes shadowed with unease. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "Something doesn't feel right." Eleanor nodded, though she too looked nervous. "We came here to find answers. We can't leave without them." "Not now." Jonah swallowed and adjusted the strap of his bag, his device still buzzing softly in his hands. "You're right," he said. "But I'm telling you, whatever's going on here is bigger than any of us. We're not just walking through an abandoned city. We're walking through something else." But we all knew that we had come too far to turn back. There was no safety to be found in retreat, not here. Not in this place. We passed through the doorway and into the vast interior of the building. The hall inside was enormous, its stone floors polished smooth by centuries of wear. Massive columns stretched up toward the ceiling, their tops lost in shadow, their surfaces covered in faded markings. It felt as though the very air itself was thick with history, each inch of the space dripping with the weight of something ancient and forgotten. But as we ventured deeper, we began to notice the first unsettling details. The walls were lined with symbols we didn't recognize, etched in jagged lines that twisted and curved in patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. I would swear I saw them move, the designs folding and unfolding like living things, growing and retreating in the corner of my vision. "The markings," Eleanor whispered, "they're alive." Before any of us could respond, a sound cut through the air, distant at first, but unmistakable, a low, mournful hum. It seemed to be coming from deep within the building, resonating through the walls like some vast, unseen machinery. The air around us seemed to vibrate with the sound, and it sent a cold shiver down my spine. "What is that?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Jonah said, holding his device up. "But it's not a natural frequency. The readings, they're off the charts." We pressed on, following the hum deeper into the bowels of the structure. It grew louder with each step, until it was almost unbearable, pulsing through our skulls like a heartbeat. Then, just as we reached the center of the building, the hum abruptly stopped. And in the stillness that followed, a new sound filled the air, whispers. Soft, but clear. Echoing, distant, and yet impossibly close. "Turn back," they seemed to say, in voices that blended together, a chorus of whispers too numerous to count. "You should never have come." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. We froze, every muscle tensed, every sense on alert. We couldn't see anyone. We couldn't hear anything other than the whispers, growing louder now, more insistent. Jonah backed away slowly, his eyes wide. "This isn't just a ghost town. This place is alive." And then I saw it, a figure, standing at the far end of the vast hall. I couldn't make out its details, but it was there. And it was watching us. Before any of us could react, the figure moved. It didn't walk. It shifted, a blur of movement, as though it were sliding through dimensions, bending the very space around it. My heart skipped a beat as it came closer, its form distorting, twisting like a shadow made of smoke. It paused in front of us, its features unclear, its form shifting in ways that defied logic. But there was no mistaking the message in its presence. It was not welcoming us. It was warning us. The whispers grew louder, as though they were coming from the figure itself. "Once found, never to leave." The words were clear now, echoing in my mind, chilling me to the bone. It was as if the city was alive, conscious of our presence, and it was ready to claim us. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my feet wouldn't move. The figure began to move again, its form flickering like a broken film reel. And I knew, with a terrible certainty, that we had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The figure hovered in front of us, its form flickering in and out of focus like a nightmare that refused to take shape. Its presence was suffocating, an intangible weight that pressed down on our chests, making every breath feel harder than the last. The whispers, those haunting voices that had followed us from the moment we entered the city, grew louder, more desperate, echoing off the stone walls in a maddening chorus. Each word felt like a curse, each syllable an icy hand around my throat. "Once found, never to leave." The figure stretched out its hand, fingers elongating unnaturally, its form distorting like melted wax under the heat of a flame. My heart hammered in my chest as I backed away, my legs trembling beneath me. But I wasn't the only one. Jonah, Eleanor, and Marcus were all frozen, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. And then, as if sensing our hesitation, the figure did something I can never fully explain. It moved. Not in the way a human moves. Not with purpose or intention. It shifted, as though it were bleeding through the very fabric of reality, a distortion that bent time and space around it. It was a blur. One moment it was standing in front of us, and the next, it was behind me, its breath cold against the back of my neck. I turned quickly, my pulse racing, but there was nothing there. Just the empty, silent hall. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but my voice caught in my throat. The whispers had stopped, but their absence felt worse. It was as though the entire building had taken a collective breath, waiting for something. For us. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said, his voice barely audible, tight with terror. "This place, it's not just a city. It's a prison." Eleanor nodded, her face drained of color. "Whatever this thing is, whatever this city is, it's not natural. We've disturbed something we weren't meant to. And now it's not going to let us leave." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow, the truth of them sinking deep into my bones. We had come to uncover history. We had come seeking knowledge. But we had found something much darker, something alive. And now, it was angry. Jonah pulled at his backpack, fumbling with the zipper. We need to find a way out. Now. His voice was shaky, frantic. He was pulling out gadgets, scanning the air, trying to find any signal, any escape route, but the devices were useless. The readings from before had disappeared. The city had swallowed them whole, its eerie stillness blocking out everything. But then, as if on cue, the ground beneath our feet trembled. At first, it was a minor shift, a subtle vibration that ran through the floor. But it quickly grew stronger, and the walls began to hum, the sound low and guttural. The building seemed to groan, like it was waking from some deep slumber. And then I saw it, cracks spreading across the stone beneath us, branching out like veins of some twisted organism. "Something's happening," I said, my voice rising with panic. "The city, it's reacting to us." And then I felt it. A shift in the air, a pressure building in the space around us. It was as though the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment. I didn't know what was worse, the oppressive silence or the terrifying hum, like the city itself was alive and watching us. I turned back to look at the figure. But it was gone. There was no sign of it. Only the heavy, suffocating air. "Where did it go?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "Where did it?" I didn't finish the sentence. Because we all felt it at the same time. A presence. Not one, but many. The shadows along the walls were moving, stretching like liquid, bending and shifting into shapes that were too fluid, too unnatural to be real. Figures, no, faces, appeared in the walls themselves. Faces that flickered in and out of existence, staring at us with hollow eyes. The whispers started again, louder now, echoing through the chamber with a chorus of voices, all speaking in unison. "Once found, never to leave." I staggered back, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. At the far end of the hall, where the shadows met the stone, something began to form. The figure was returning, its shape more solid now, more distinct. But it wasn't alone. Others had appeared. Figures, people, who were not frozen anymore. They moved in strange, jerky motions, as though they were waking up, blinking in and out of existence as they walked toward us. The figures had faces, but their eyes were black, soulless voids, and their mouths stretched into twisted, silent screams. "We're too late," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with dread. "They've been waiting for us." The realization hit me with the force of a slap. The city wasn't abandoned. It wasn't trapped. It had been waiting for someone to find it. Waiting for us. A wave of nausea swept over me as the shadows around us closed in, the walls vibrating with an unnatural hum. The figures grew closer, their movements jerky, distorted, as if they were caught between dimensions. Their eyes flickered with something ancient and malevolent. These weren't people. Not anymore. They were the trapped, the ones who had come before us, those who had tried to uncover the city's secrets. And now, we were no different. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath our feet, and the floor cracked open. The stone broke away, revealing a dark abyss below, a vast chasm that seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't just the building that was changing, it was the city. The whole place was shifting, warping, as though the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. "We need to leave." "Now," Eleanor cried, her face pale with terror. I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The weight of the figures, the trapped souls that had once walked these streets, held us in place. We were inside the city now. Its walls had eyes, its streets had ears, and there was no escaping. No way out. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Soft at first, but growing louder until they filled the air, echoing in the vast, empty hall. Someone was coming. We turned, and my stomach dropped into my feet. A figure appeared at the entrance of the hall, one I recognized. It was the woman, the one whose hand had been outstretched in the market square. She was no longer frozen, no longer a statue. She moved now, but there was something wrong with her. Her eyes were empty, hollow, pupils swallowed by darkness. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The figure took a slow, deliberate step forward, and as she did, the others followed her, more and more of them, their faces distorted with pain and rage, their eyes empty and endless. I tried to run, but it felt like the city itself was closing in around me. The walls seemed to stretch, the air thickening with an unbearable pressure. We couldn't leave. The whispers were deafening now, filling my mind with a single, undeniable truth. Once found, never to leave. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grabbed Jonah's arm. "We need to go. Right now." But Jonah wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the figures, his face pale with horror. We can't. We've crossed the threshold. This city doesn't let anyone leave." And that's when I understood. We had entered the forgotten city, and now we were part of its curse. The city had claimed us as its own, and there would be no escape. We were trapped, just like all the souls who had come before us, frozen in time, lost to the world. The last thing I saw before the shadows engulfed us was the figure of the woman, her eyes locked onto mine, her mouth opening wider and wider in a silent scream. And then, there was nothing but darkness. And that, my friends, is the story of the forgotten city. A place where time itself has been twisted, trapping the souls of those who dared to uncover its secrets. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to subscribe to Deadscape Diaries and turn on the notifications so you never miss a journey into the unknown. If you find yourself lost in the darkness, just remember, the city is always waiting for its next visitor. Stay curious. Stay cautious. And above all, remember, not all things should be uncovered. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your lights on.